So, how is it that someone can start to identify their own cognitive strengths? Like, how is it that I like to think, and maybe I'm wrong, I could be wrong, but I like to think that I understand where my cognitive strengths lie and what I understand innately. And then I try to bring in subject matter experts, such as yourself, to have conversations to test that. Like, how much do I really know and how much more do I have to know? Yeah, you
Right.
start with the premise of, I know I don't know what I don't know, right? Um, and then you add the question, help me understand, right? That's how I approach things. But that's me. But how do I help people? Other than me, like how do I help? How do we help people identify and leverage their own strengths, for critical thinking?
One of the major things that we as human beings, and this includes just about everybody, okay, we don't want to be wrong.
Right.
Okay, so if we don't want to be wrong, what's that mean? You will see people go to their graves not to be wrong. Once they've made a decision, good or bad or ugly, they will find a way of defending it.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a problem. If you want to get over your own bias, check your ego at the door. And I'll give you an example. On the first book I wrote, I started in 1995. And I had a class with a guy named Arthur Frederick Ide. Arthur Frederick Ide has written over 400 books. That's nuts. That's crazy. Written over 400 books. Most people haven't read over 400 books.
Right.
And so I went to the class and I was that one person where I want to learn. So I had this great idea for a book and I start writing and I write all this stuff down and I'm so proud of myself that I've written this and I think it's the greatest thing since sliced bread, right? I give it to him. It came back with more red than black on it. And I had to make a decision.
Right.
And I decided I can either get upset and walk out of here and indignant and not learn anything or check my ego at the door and start learning. And I chose to start learning. And he taught me so much about writing. At the point, I was a horrible writer. I'm a pretty decent writer now. I've sold thousands of books. But that's because I was able to do, that is one of the most important things I was able to do. And if the one thing that people can do to change is really check yourself and going, am I doing this because of personal prejudices or am I doing it because it is the right thing to go do? Does that make sense?
No, it does. I mean, I think that's a simple way for people to understand that is like, check it at the door, right?
Yeah.
In order to achieve and maintain a growth mentality, you have to, in my opinion, assume nothing, right? I don't think you can assume anything. I think you have to at least question it, right? You can have your thoughts, like I think this is correct, or I've studied enough to feel comfortable that this particular position is one that can be defended, right? But if you really, really want to have a growth mentality, you have to be able to put that aside for a minute and say, okay, let me hear what your perspective is. Let me hear what you're saying. And maybe that informs what it is that I think that's a
lot of times it reinforces.
It reinforces what you right?
believe. Once in a while, and once as we grow and as we mature, we get more set in our ways. Everybody, it just is
I think it's just neurology, right? It's just the way people's brains work.
And it should. Once you've been successful in a certain way for a long time, you don't change that.
Right.
Why would you?
Right.
That's when you get into big trouble, right? So,
right.
But that being said, to be a constant learner, to be a lifelong learner, you've got to go, am I still thinking about this logically and rationally and not something that's inherent in me to have a belief that's because I want to believe it and not because it's true. So
yeah, I recently was in a position that I quoted George Bernard Shaw.
Yes.
And the quote I won't remember specifically because I wrote it down when I quoted it, but it's something along the lines of let's see, what was it? At the end of it is that the man who cannot change his mind cannot progress at all, right? There's no progress if you cannot embrace change is essentially what he was saying, right? That you have to be able to embrace change and understand that again, from my perspective, and again, I'm just talking about me when I say this, I'm like, it's about saying, okay, well, wait a second. Again, what don't I know about this? Like, is there something I don't know here? Like, help me understand what it is that I don't know. And perhaps there's something there that will persuade me. Perhaps. But typically, it ends up, like you said, it ends up reinforcing what you had already come to. Like, I've already come to this conclusion. I'm not being rooted in a conclusion to where I'm inflexible, but at least from that perspective, again, you've informed yourself enough to where you can defend your position and be open enough to understand that you could potentially end up conceding a point, and even in that defense.
Well, and that's the other thing too. Is another thing that's very helpful that I've found is don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And what I mean by that is sometimes you'll find somebody who you have a lot of respect for, and they have some great stuff, or they even have horrible stuff, but they were right about something.
Right.
And you can't say, well, they're wrong because they're this.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we've seen a lot of this with politics, right? Where people hate the person, but it's like, what about their policies and procedures? What policies don't you like?
Right.
And that's really the question, and that's a hard question to ask. I've been working on myself on that, to ask these questions instead of getting into the degenerative thing where you start just insulting a person or
Right.
something instead of, but what about the policies
Mm-hmm.
of this individual that you don't like? What don't you like? And watch, a lot of times people become silent.
Right. No, agreed.
It's like,
agreed. And I think
Okay.
that there's even, I think I see it now, and again, this is just me, but I see it now, and there is this determinative process of avoiding policy discussions, right? There's this, there can be a position where, whatever position is, position X. I believe in position X, right?
Right.
And then if you ask the question, well, why do you believe in position X? Like, what is it that makes that the correct position to take? And there's never really any substance behind those answers, right? There's a lot of dancing around. There's a lot of avoiding an answer, right? And I get it. I mean, from a political perspective, sometimes it's self-preservation. Sometimes it's just perhaps that particular individual is being asked a question that they're not fully informed on. And many times, I think the politicians that we elect, once they're in elected position, they rely on a lot of other people to inform them, right, about what's going on. And if they get cornered and they're having to answer a very specific policy, they don't have the answer. It's not that they're not familiar with the subject matter. They could very well be familiar with the subject matter, but they don't know the specifics of the policy, right?
Yes, and when you talk about, when I see some people, and I've seen these interview the man on the street type of thing, and they go up and this person's pushing for something,
Mm-hmm.
and then they're asked and they don't have an answer.
Mm-hmm.
So then it begs the question to me, and that was another thing the professor taught me, this Dr. Germanian, begging the question, okay? So it begs the question to me is like, why are they out there petitioning for something that they don't believe in? There's some reason. Some of them may. There's an argument they're getting paid, okay,
Mm-hmm.
fine. But there's another argument too. Everybody wants to be part of something, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they're out there with their friends thinking they're helping when they don't even know what they're going up against. That's scary to me.
Yeah,
That's really scary.
I agree. I find myself thinking that quite often. It's one of the times that I will rail at the television, right?
Yeah.
And I'm always like, I've been in situations where I've been at a rally or I've been involved in something, right, where I was there and I actually experienced it. And most of the time for me, it's experiential. I want to be there because I want to see this.
Yeah.
I want to take it in. Maybe it's historic in some way or whatever, right? Whatever that might be. But there's a reason to be there, and I know what my reason is.
Right.
But they never interview me. Like, I'm never the person that they ask, and I'll be sitting at home and they ask someone, I'm like, well, why are you asking that guy that? I mean, it's obvious this guy doesn't know, right? No offense to him, whoever, or her, or whoever they might be, but it's like, you're asking the wrong people the questions, right? Ask the people who might have a genuine interest, and it almost seems to me that from a media perspective, they kind of avoid those people. Because it's a lot easier to consume the guy who doesn't know. It's more entertaining to talk to the guy who doesn't know.
Yes, and the news media, like you said, they're going to focus on the bad. They're going to focus on the things that are going to get them the most
Right,
views.
they're going to get the
You
looks.
know,
Right.
because
And that kind of brings me to my next question,
Yes,
because I was
please.
looking at this and I was like, we talked a little bit about social. Actually, I talked about social media earlier. I guess that's fair.
No, we're good.
But we talked about, in your book you talk about, how independent critical thinking, right? And with social media now, I mean, as I mentioned, it's an overload. It's intentional. It is focused on continuing to keep your attention wherever your attention is. The idea is to monopolize your attention, right? Where are your eyes? Where are your ears? What is it you're looking at? What is it that you're reading, watching? More than likely, it's what are you watching? Why are you watching it? And how do I keep you here? Because I monetize that. I've monetized your attention. So with that, what do you see as some of the threats to independent critical thinking, and how do we combat that in the modern age?
Oh, wow. You just opened up a can of worms.
All right, well,
Okay.
where are the worms?
Yeah. Well, I think the real story of fake news by Mark Dice hits some great topics and so forth, but and I talk about this in the book, and it's when you first do the subject, it's the brainwashing. When you think of brainwashing, somebody in a quiet little dark room being with lights on them and all this other stuff, and a lot of the media is brainwashing. I'm seeing people that I know that I feel that they're pretty darn intelligent, and when you get past the first layer and try to question why they believe this, they can't answer things. That's what's scary to me, is when people can't even, they're not critically thinking. So I think today there's a tremendous amount of brainwashing. I agree with you on social media, and it's engaging. It's tough when I
It's
start
hard.
looking for something, and
Mhm.
it's like, this is entertaining, this is entertaining, this is entertaining, and I keep asking myself, am I being brainwashed on this? And I try to go with the sources that I trust, that I believe in, that are being as honest as possible, and that are reflective of other things that I'm reading from other areas and so forth.
Right.
Because over time, you'll find that things will be consistent
Right.
in from great resources, and that's why I like books. I mean, I love books, and give you an idea of growing up, I was exactly the opposite. I was held back in second grade because I couldn't read. I went to remedial reading. My mother let me read comic books because I wouldn't read anything else. When they sent me to Evelyn Wood's Reading Dynamics, I literally went. I went to Henry Ford Community College. I went to Wayne County Community College to get through English, because as an engineer, I'm never going to need it. I paid for that sin for many years, and now I'm a writer. But it gives me an insight that a lot of people don't have, and that's it. To make it, when I write, it's to a really smart 15-year-old. It's not insulting to anybody.
No,
and that's how I write, is because I want to. I don't want it to be talking down to people.
Right.
I don't want to come across as I know all this stuff.
Right.
Am I a critical thinker? Yes, but I could also say decide for yourself.
Right.
I don't have. But for people to become a critical thinker, it's the media. Watch what's going on and watch how you're thinking, and ask the questions of yourself. Is this impacting me, and how? Are my emotions getting involved in things? And maybe sometimes just get off of it for a few days, or or a couple of weeks and things, and see if you feel better and things like this.
Right. I would agree with you there, and I think for me that's my strategy, because to your point, the manipulation of the dopamine that just the dopamine hit that you get with social media, right?
That's a good way to put it. Yes.
It's a neurological conditioning that is well understood by those who are technology partners in the social media age. They understand that. There's no question that they understand that. So even to your point, again, I'm the same way. Like, I will look for I do look for the counter arguments, right? I do, because I know where they are and they're easier to find, right? Counter arguments are always easier to find. But when you found sources that are consistent,
And rock solid. If
and-
you
and
get
yeah.
rock solid, sources.
You're bouncing from a couple of different, maybe it's a different reporter or a different writer or it's in a different periodical. And you said it earlier, if the footnotes start matching, right, and you're able to get those sources, those citations, and they start to like line up, then you can feel a little bit more comfortable about that particular perspective or that particular point. Like, okay, hey, there's some, for lack of better terms, there's some science behind this, right?
And you hear other people that are saying the same things. I started getting off, and I got a little on tangent, but on books, what I find is you take a book, and a lot of times it's 1,000 hours or 2,000 hours, and it's a lifetime experience. When you look at some of the ones, Dale Carnegie's book is a must read. It should be a must read for everybody. How to Win Friends and Influence People.
No, I would agree. Him and old school is Zig Ziglar, right?
Yeah,
I think Zig Ziglar's a great read.
Oh, he definitely he's an excellent read, and also is who's Think and Grow Rich.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah.
These
yeah.
books, some of them took 25 years of experience and things and so to write. So you could take any book and read it, and you get the benefit
Right.
of 20 or 30 years experience in 10 to 15 to 20 hours. And when you think the magnitude of that, one of the quotes, and I'm going to paraphrase it, but a person who never reads a book leads one life. A person who reads 1,000 books can lead 1,000 lives.
I literally ran across that same
Yeah.
quote. Like 2 weeks ago, I ran across
Yeah.
that quote. I can't remember who is
And
that.
I have it in the book, and
Okay.
I can find out. I'm not going to do it right now. But for this book, I ended up spending like around $2,600. Now that's everything. That's researching, that's reading books, that's doing whatever I needed to do to get the information. You might read a book and pull off a few fantastic paragraphs out of it that are profound and things like this. And there's a lot of great people through time that have rock solid information that you can learn from and grow. So critical thinking, anybody can do it if they really want to do it, but you got to be honest with yourself.
So is it fair to say that that's what you mean by a new breed of critical thinker? Is that where you're going with that? I mean, how do we? And it's not easy, and I'm not asking you to put a nice little bow on this. Let's tie this up, right? I mean, that's not the point. The point is, like, when you're talking about a new breed of critical thinking, what is it that you're saying when you're saying that? Like, what is the meaning behind that phrasing, if you will?
I'm trying to remember when I wrote that, but it's basically, is we have so much information today. It's more of information overload than anything, and it's being able to select what is going to be the most helpful for you and everything, but just systematically going out there. And I can give you the things. That's why I wrote them down.
No, go ahead.
An open and curious mind is number one.
Okay.
That, and like I say, that sounds so much simpler than it is.
Well, yeah, of course.
It really does. Getting a first class education. I don't necessarily mean going to school. If you ever listen to Elon Musk, and I like him, and that may be controversial, but I don't care. I think he's done fantastic stuff. Becoming an eternal student. And when I say education, whether you educate yourself or get a great education from good sources, because today it can get insane.
Mm-hmm.
These people are into debt, $100,000, $200,000, $300,000
Right.
for an education that they can, get paid $40,000 to $50,000 in their job. How long you're going to be paying off for the rest of your life?
I can attest to that. My daughter has a doctorate in psychology, which, kudos, obviously, right? And she's a brilliant young lady, but it's cost her. It's not cheap.
Got it. Well, the next thing is finding your meaning and purpose.
Mm-hmm.
When we all have to have a meaning and purpose, and it makes life a lot simpler. It helps you get up in the morning, helps you understand what you're going to go do, and things like this. And so we all have to. Tom Hopkins had a statement: "Do the most productive thing possible at every given moment." And again, I'm maybe paraphrasing, but basically, sometimes rest is the most important thing. There's all sorts of things like that. Become a focused reader, and as I say, I can't say enough about that, because you can put out an article which somebody may have taken 4 or 5 hours on, but you read a book,
Right.
that somebody put 500 or 1,000 or 2,000 hours into
Right.
things like this, and there's so many good ones out there that are just incredible, and read from a wide array of people. I've learned so much from so many different people that helped me to understand when you hear the arguments from one side or another, you go, no, because of this is what I believe, and it's you get a pretty solid base. Learn from great educators. I've been really blessed to have some fantastic teachers. Thomas Sowell, although I've never met him, I would love to shake his hand. He's a fantastic teacher. Dr. Kurtbanian had other fantastic teachers, and going through school and things like this. And I was lucky to have those things.
Right.
And I think everybody needs to search out those teachers and have people help them, or mentors and teachers and people that you work with. Okay, become a student of history. Boy, history teaches you a lot.
It does.
When somebody goes, "Oh, everything's so terrible and everything," look back in history. Oh my
Right.
gosh, the carnage and everything else that we as human beings have done to each other is really not a good thing. And knowing about it, and then knowing in the blessed time that we live, and it could all change tomorrow, I get it, but for now, we live in a pretty darn good time, and we need to appreciate that and appreciate what that means, and the freedoms that we have, and really understand where those freedoms come from. Don't let me or yourself talk about it. Everybody has to find that for themselves. What does that really mean? And then activities. Personally, I play poker, and I'm not really a gambler so much, but it's a critical thinking game. That or chess. It just happens to be poker because you have to use both sides of the brain. I love the mathematics, and that's how I got into writing mathematics about poker, because it was fascinating to me being an engineer. There's 52 cards in the mathematics. I've written 2 books and a workbook on it so far, and I'm considering a 3rd book. Go figure. And I've read like a few dozen books on it. It's just amazing for 52 little cards in a game called Texas Nolan Hold'em.
Right.
But it uses both sides of the brain, and you're making constant decisions in imperfect information and trying to calculate everything else. But chess is another game. But games to really stimulate the brain and get you going. And then another thing is experience different cultures. Now, if you have the money, then you can go travel. I've been very fortunate. I traveled well over 40 countries and things like this. But even if you don't have that, you can go down to these little enclaves, or what are they called, of certain cultures and experience through that. So It's not like you have to have a ton of money to go do this type of stuff. You can see things, but opening your mind to different cultures, because the strongest cultures take from each other. The Chinese, the rudder, the compass, all these other things. And then there was a Chinese head back in, I don't know, the 1400s. Because I think it was the 1100s or so, they were, Europe was not up to where they were until the 1800s. But there was an emperor that came in and said they're not going to travel anymore in the sea, and that just shut them down. And so then they, atrophied, where Europe grew from there. So there's a little emperor, whatever, did some really bad things.
Well, the other thing too. I mean, I appreciate you saying that. I mean, because I think that helps people kind of understand. And it's a more comprehensive overview of what we've kind of hit on.
Yeah.
A little. I've tried to kind of keep us on a track to where we've kind of maintained that critical thinking premise and introduce a couple of different ideas, but the breakdown there is just to me almost second nature. Like you name those things, right? And I'm like, I do that, right? Not everybody does, and I think that's probably more so what you're after at the end of the day. Is just like if you take a minute and zoom out and look at things with a little bit more of an open mind. Then critical thinking almost is a natural progression from there. Is that fair?
Yes, and keeping an open mind. I mean, I love diversity, not the way the government tries it, but meeting people from different cultures and different ways of thinking and everything else, you learn so much. If you just open your mind to it.
Absolutely, 100%. In my experience, one of the things that was the most, I would say it's a very critical part of my growth mentality process and study, if you will, right? My son plays soccer, and we lived in Houston, And so as soon as he started playing at any particular level of, competitive soccer, there were Afrikaners, there were Brits, there were, kids from, all over the world who were playing the same game, right?
Mhm.
And so you meet those people, you meet those parents, you start talking to them, you have the conversations, you find that, they're Arsenal fans and you're a Newcastle fan, whatever, right? But it gets you talking to other people, and you get all these new experiences that you might not have had otherwise. To your point about being a world traveler, one of my best friends was an expat here in the U.S. Got his U.S. citizenship, the whole 9 yards, and then he decided to go back to England, right? So that's not a big leap, but I went to go visit him in England, and I traveled to the north of England. I went to Newcastle, and I saw Newcastle, and I met people in Newcastle. I went to 400-year-old pubs and stuff like that, and that changes who you are. It changes how you look at things. The fact that we were even in the UK and got to visit buildings that are older than our country.
Yeah,
right?
because you hear all this stuff on the news or whatever, and then you meet people and you sit down and have a beer with them,
Right,
or have
it's
dinner with them.
it's a
totally
different thing.
different experience.
Absolutely, 100%.
And then you ask them, well, what do you think about this? And you really listen to their answers, and you find out we want a lot of the same things.
Yep. Yep, I think that's probably a good place to kind of maybe end it. Is that I think if critical thinking as a practice, at minimum, should lead to good conversations like this one.
Yes, agreed.
All right, well that's it for us here today. We could probably go like for 4 hours, honestly.
Easy.
We could easily. This would be an easy conversation, but I want to kind of wrap on that. If you are interested in, I'm going to have a link up on the site. It'll have this book as well as the other writings. If you're a poker player, maybe you want to read one of Chuck's poker books. But I'll put this up there so you guys have access to it. You can look into it further. Use your own critical thinking to examine the critical thinking that Chuck is talking about here. I just found it fascinating. I found it fascinating that there's a guy like this in our neighborhood. I don't think you're specifically from Leander, but he was at a Leander event. And I'm like, I've got to get this guy on the podcast. So, Chuck, I appreciate your time. Thank you so very, very much. I've thoroughly enjoyed this.
I have too, Andrew. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And that's it for this episode, guys. Keep tuned. We're going to have a few new things coming up here in the next few weeks. And we're going to be examining things Leander as well as things a little bit outside of Leander. So I thank you for your time and look forward to the next episode. And I'm going to read this book next. This one goes on my bedside because this will be the one I read next. So thanks, Chuck. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right. That's it for today. Thanks, guys.
Bye now.
Lean In Leander was recorded at Lantern Media Studio. Engineered by Morgan Tuttle. Produced and edited by Andrew Naughty. Music provided by Ben Sound.